The first words Kang Dae-young spoke in 7 years were to her. Imani Brooke stood frozen in the doorway of the penthouse suite, still wearing her wedding hanbok, when she heard it, a voice so deep, so rich, so impossibly beautiful that it made her heart forget how to beat. "You're shivering." 3 syllables. That's all it took to shatter everything she thought she knew about her new husband. The man the entire world believed was mute. The man whose silence had built an empire worth billions. The man she'd been forced to marry 3 hours ago without ever hearing a single word from his lips. But now. Now he was standing behind her, removing his suit jacket and draping it over her shoulders with hands so gentle they made her eyes sting. W8. Imani spun around, her brown eyes wide with shock. "You can talk." Kang Dae-young's dark gaze held hers without flinching. And then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth lifted into the ghost of a smile. "Only to you." Before we dive deeper into this story, if you're new here, welcome to the family. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what you think Dae-young's secret is. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back into this story because things are about to get intense. 3 days earlier, Atlanta, Georgia. Imani Brooks had learned early in life that the universe had a cruel sense of humor. But standing in her grandmother's living room, staring at the photograph of the man she was supposed to marry in 72 hours, she realized the universe had truly outdone itself this time. "He's mute, Grandma." Imani's voice was flat. Controlled. The same voice she used when negotiating million-dollar contracts at her marketing firm. "You want me to marry a man who can't speak?" Evelyn Brooks, 73 years old and sharper than a surgeon's scalpel, didn't even look up from her tea. "I want you to marry a man who will protect this family." His voice has nothing to do with that. His family has everything to do with it. Imani slapped the photograph onto the coffee table. The man staring back at her was devastatingly handsome, sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to see through the camera, black hair swept back from a face that belonged on magazine covers. But beauty meant nothing when the surname attached to that face was Kang. The Kang family runs the largest underground syndicate on the East Coast. They're the reason your father is still alive. The words hit Imani like a bucket of ice water. Evelyn finally looked up, her dark eyes, so similar to Imani's own, filled with a weariness that made her look every one of her 73 years. 17 years ago, your father made a mistake. A mistake that would have cost him his life if Chairman Kang hadn't intervened. The debt was never money, baby girl. It was a promise. A blood oath. And now that promise has come due. Imani's throat tightened. "So I'm payment. You're an alliance." Evelyn's voice softened. "The Kang boy, Dae-young, he needs a wife. Someone strong. Someone who won't break under pressure. Chairman Kang specifically requested you." "He requested me?" Imani laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not a mail-order bride, Grandma. I have a career. A life. I was supposed to close the biggest deal of my company's history next month, and now you're telling me I have to throw it all away to marry some silent mafia prince. I'm telling you that if you don't marry him, the Kang family will withdraw their protection. And the enemies your father made 17 years ago? They haven't forgotten. They've been waiting." Evelyn reached across the table and took Imani's hand. Her grip was firm despite her age. "I know this isn't fair. I know this isn't what you wanted. But sometimes, baby girl, survival means making impossible choices." Imani stared at the photograph again. At those dark, unreadable eyes. Mute, she thought. Cold. Untouchable. What kind of life awaited her with a man made of silence? The Kang estate, the same night. Across the city, in a mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home, Kang Dae-young sat alone in his study. The room was dark save for the glow of his laptop screen, casting sharp shadows across his face. At 28 years old, Dae-young had already accomplished what most men couldn't achieve in a lifetime. He'd taken his father's underground empire and legitimized half of it, building the Kang Group into a powerhouse that touched everything from real estate to technology. Forbes had called him the Silent King, a CEO who conducted billion-dollar negotiations without ever speaking a word. They thought he couldn't speak. That some tragic accident had stolen his voice. They were wrong. Dae-young could speak. He simply chose not to. Not since that night 7 years ago when the last words he'd spoken had cost his mother her life. His phone buzzed. A message from his father. The Brooks woman has agreed. Wedding is in 3 days. Don't disappoint me. Dae-young stared at the message for a long moment. Then he opened a file on his laptop, a file he'd been studying for weeks. Imani Brooks. 26 years old. MBA from Columbia. Youngest marketing director in her company's history. Fluent in 3 languages. Ran half marathons for charity. And according to every photograph in the file, absolutely stunning. Dark skin that seemed to glow in every picture. A smile that was rare but radiant when it appeared. Eyes that held intelligence and fire in equal measure. His future wife. Dae-young closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He hadn't wanted this marriage. Hadn't wanted any marriage. But his father had made the terms clear: marry the Brooks woman or watch the family's carefully constructed peace agreements crumble. The alliance with the Brooks family wasn't just about an old debt, it was about survival. About bridging 2 worlds that had operated in suspicious parallel for too long. And if Dae-young had to take a wife to secure that alliance, then so be it. But he would give her nothing of himself. Not his words. Not his heart. Not the broken pieces of his soul that he'd spent 7 years trying to bury. It would be a marriage in name only. Cold. Distant. Transactional. That was the plan. The wedding day, Atlanta Grand Ballroom. Imani had never felt more alone than she did walking down that aisle. The ballroom was packed with over 300 guests, half of them her family, half of them Kong associates who looked at her like she was an interesting specimen under a microscope. The decorations were stunning, a blend of African and Korean aesthetics that someone had clearly put enormous thought into. Traditional Korean drums played alongside the deep rhythm of gem drums. The air smelled of roses and whatever expensive cologne seemed to cling to every Kong family member. But none of it felt real. Imani's traditional Korean hanbok was ivory with gold embroidery, modified to include Kent cloth accents along the hem, a small concession her grandmother had negotiated. Her locks were piled elegantly atop her head, adorned with gold pins. She looked, according to every gasping guest she passed, like a queen. She felt like a prisoner. And at the end of the aisle, waiting for her with the same unreadable expression she'd seen in every photograph, was Kang Dae-young. He was taller than she'd expected. Broader. The traditional Korean wedding attire suited him in a way that almost seemed unfair, the deep blue fabric emphasizing his powerful frame. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that caught her. Dark. Deep. And for just a fraction of a second, as their gazes met across the crowded ballroom, something flickered in their depths. Pain, Imani realized with a start. He's in pain. Then the moment passed, and his expression shuddered once more. The ceremony was brief. Traditional Korean elements blended with Western vows, though Dae-young's vows were read by an officiant since the groom himself said nothing. Just nodded at the appropriate moments. Placed the ring on her finger with hands that were surprisingly steady. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Dae-young leaned in to complete the traditional kiss. Imani expected cold. Expected distant. Expected nothing. Instead, his lips brushed hers with a gentleness that stole her breath. Soft. Brief. And somehow, impossibly, tender. Then he pulled away, and the mask was back. The penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton was obscenely luxurious. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a glittering view of the Atlanta skyline. The living area alone was larger than Imani's entire apartment. Fresh flowers perfumed the air, and a bottle of champagne sat chilling beside a fruit platter she had no appetite for. Imani stood at the window, still wearing her hanbok, arms wrapped around herself. This is your life now, she told herself. Married to a stranger. A silent stranger. She heard him before she saw him, the soft click of the suite door closing, followed by measured footsteps. Dae-young had disappeared after the reception to take a phone call, leaving her to be escorted to the suite by his assistant. She'd been alone for nearly an hour, trying to process the magnitude of what she'd just done. And now her husband was here. She didn't turn around. Couldn't. If she looked at him now, she might crumble, and Imani Brooks did not crumble. "I know this isn't what either of us wanted," she said to the window, to the city lights, to anyone but him. "But I need you to know that I'm not some fragile doll you can ignore until I disappear. I'm going to be your wife in public. I'll play the part. I'll smile and attend your events and pretend like this is some fairy tale romance. But I need." "You're shivering." Imani's entire body went rigid. "What?" She spun around, her eyes wide, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Dae-young stood 3 feet away, his tie loosened, his jacket already removed. And the expression on his face, the soft, almost concerned furrow of his brow, looked nothing like the cold mask she'd seen all day. What did you just say?" she whispered. He moved closer. Slowly. Deliberately. Like approaching a wild animal he didn't want to spook. When he was close enough to touch, he shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth of the fabric, still carrying his body heat and that subtle expensive cologne, surrounded her immediately. "You're shivering," he repeated. And this time, there was no mistaking it. That voice, deep, rich, with the faintest accent, was real. Was him. "You can talk." Imani's voice cracked. "Everyone said you were mute. 7 years. They said you haven't spoken a word in 7 years. Dae-young's gaze held hers. "I haven't." "Then why?" "Because you were about to cry." His jaw tightened, like the admission cost him something. "And I couldn't. I didn't want you to cry. Not on your wedding night. Not because of me." Imani felt tears prick her eyes anyway, which was ridiculous because she never cried. "I don't understand. Why me? Why speak to me?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he reached up, his hand hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure he was allowed. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But when I saw you walking down that aisle, something broke. The silence I've built for 7 years just cracked." Imani's breath caught. "Dae-young. You don't have to pretend with me." His voice dropped lower. "This marriage, I know you didn't choose it. I know you're here because of your father's debt, because my father made demands, because neither of us had a choice. But I want you to know." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I want you to know that I will never hurt you. I will never force you into anything. And I will spend every day of this marriage trying to be worthy of whatever you're willing to give me." A tear slipped down Imani's cheek before she could stop it. Dae-young's expression flickered with something like anguish. "I made you cry anyway." "No." She shook her head, laughing despite herself. "No, you didn't. I expected cold. I expected distant. I expected to spend my wedding night alone in some corner while my mute husband ignored me. I didn't expect." She gestured vaguely at him. "This. You." He was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he reached out and brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I can't promise I'll be good at this," he said. "I can't promise I won't retreat into silence when the world gets too loud. But I can promise that when I do speak, it will be to you. Only to you." Imani didn't know what possessed her to do what she did next. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the raw honesty in his voice. Maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time since this nightmare began, someone was treating her like a person instead of a pawn. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Dae-young went completely still. For a terrifying second, she thought she'd made a mistake. Then, slowly, his arms came around her, pulling her against his chest. He was warm. solid. And when she pressed her ear to his heart, she could hear it racing just as fast as hers. "Thank you," she whispered into his chest. "For breaking your silence for me." His arms tightened around her. He didn't speak again that night. But he didn't need to. 1 week later, the Kong penthouse. Marriage to Dae-young was nothing like Imani had expected. In public, he was exactly what the world knew him to be, silent, commanding, and devastatingly cold. Board meetings, business dinners, family functions, he navigated them all without speaking a single word, communicating through written notes and a trusted assistant who had mastered the art of reading his subtle gestures. But in private? In private, Dae-young was a different man entirely. "You worked through lunch again." His voice, still startling after a week, came from the doorway of her home office. "That's the third time this week." Imani looked up from her laptop, fighting a smile. "Are you tracking my eating habits now?" "Someone has to." He entered the room carrying a tray, actual food, arranged with surprising care. Grilled salmon, steamed vegetables, rice. "Your grandmother called. She's worried about you." "My grandmother calls every 3 hours. She's been worried about me since I was born." Then stop giving her reasons to worry. He set the tray beside her laptop. "Eat." Imani raised an eyebrow. "Is this how it's going to be? You ordering me around?" The corner of his mouth twitched. "I don't order. I strongly suggest." She laughed despite herself. It was becoming a habit, laughing around Dae-young. Which was absurd, because nothing about their situation should have been funny. But there was something about him. Something beneath that cold exterior that made her want to dig deeper. To uncover every hidden layer of the man who had spent 7 years in silence. "Why did you stop speaking?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dae-young's expression flickered. For a moment, she thought he might retreat, might slide back behind that wall of silence he'd built so carefully. Instead, he pulled a chair close to her desk and sat down. 7 years ago, he began slowly, there was an incident. A rival family decided to send my father a message. They took my mother. Imani's blood ran cold. Dae-young. I was 21. Cocky. Thought I knew everything. His jaw tightened. I found where they were keeping her. Went in alone. Started negotiating. He paused. I said something wrong. I don't even remember what it was now, some smart remark, some challenge I thought would make me look strong. And they. He stopped. His hands, resting on his knees, were trembling. They killed her. Imani whispered. In front of me. His voice was barely audible. Because of what I said. Because of my words. Imani felt her heart shatter. Dae-young, that wasn't your fault. You were trying to save her. My words killed her. He looked up, and the agony in his eyes was almost unbearable to witness. So I stopped using them. If my voice could cause that much destruction, then the world was better off without it. Imani stood, crossing to him before she could think twice. She knelt beside his chair, taking his trembling hands in hers. You were a child, she said firmly. A 21-year-old boy trying to save his mother from monsters. What they did was their choice, their evil. Not yours. Never yours. You don't understand. I understand that you've been punishing yourself for 7 years for something that was never your crime. She squeezed his hands. I understand that you've locked yourself in a prison of silence because you think you don't deserve to be heard. But you're wrong, Dae-young. Your voice is beautiful. And the fact that you trusted me enough to share it? That means something. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her skin. Maybe not, she said, a small smile playing at her lips. But you're stuck with me anyway. 2 weeks later, Brooke's family gathering. If Imani thought marrying into the Kong family would make her life simpler, she was quickly proven wrong. Her grandmother had organized a family dinner to formally introduce Dae-young to the extended Brooks clan. And the extended Brooks clan had opinions. So let me get this straight. Imani's cousin Denise, the one who had married a successful surgeon and never let anyone forget it, leaned across the dinner table with a pitying smile. You married a mute man. A mute man who runs some shady business empire. And you expect us to believe this was a good decision? Imani gripped her fork so tightly it was a wonder it didn't bend. Beside her, Dae-young sat in perfect stillness. He hadn't spoken since they arrived, and Imani had warned him not to. His voice was their secret, one she treasured too much to share with people who would only use it against them. His condition doesn't define him, Imani said through gritted teeth. And his business is legitimate. The Kong Group is publicly traded on 3 major stock exchanges. Denise's smile didn't waver. And what exactly do you get out of this arrangement? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you traded your whole career for a man who can't even tell you he loves you. Something hot and dangerous flared in Imani's chest. Actually, she said, her voice deceptively calm, I get a partner who shows me he loves me instead of just saying it. Who brings me lunch when I forget to eat. Who stayed up all night helping me practice a presentation last week even though he was exhausted from meetings. Who treats me like an equal instead of a trophy to be displayed. She stood, her chair scraping back. And what do you get, Denise? A husband who works 80 hours a week and sends you jewelry instead of spending time with you. A surgeon who can't remember your anniversary without his secretary reminding him. Denise's face went red. How dare? No. How dare you? Imani was shaking now, 7 years of family judgment finally boiling over. I spent my whole life listening to this family tear each other down. Watching you compete over who married better, who made more money, who looked happier on Instagram. Well, I'm done. I married a good man. A strong man. A man who sees me when the rest of the world looks right through me. And if you can't respect that, then we're leaving. She turned to Dae-young, fully expecting to have to coax him out of his seat. He was already standing. And when he looked at her, when his eyes met hers with something that looked terrifyingly like love, she felt her heart skip. He extended his hand. She took it. They walked out together, leaving behind a dining room of stunned silence. In the car. They were 3 blocks away before Dae-young spoke. You defended me. Imani was still shaking from adrenaline. Of course I did. She was being horrible. No one has defended me like that since my mother. The raw vulnerability in his voice made her turn to look at him. In the passing streetlights, his face was half shadow, half light. Beautiful. Tortured. Then everyone else has been an idiot, she said softly. You're worth defending, Dae-young. Every single part of you. He didn't respond immediately. Just reached across the center console and took her hand. They held hands the entire drive home. And when they reached the penthouse, Dae-young led her to the living room where a table was set with candles and what smelled like an incredible home-cooked meal. You planned this, Imani breathed. I had a feeling your family dinner would be difficult. He guided her to a chair. I wanted you to have something to look forward to after. She sat, still stunned. You cooked. My mother taught me. A ghost of a smile. Before everything. She used to say that food was how our family showed love. Imani's eyes burned. Then I must be very loved right now. Dae-young's smile widened, an actual smile, unguarded and genuine, and in that moment, Imani realized something terrifying. She was falling. Hard. 1 month into the marriage. The peace couldn't last. Imani had known that from the beginning. The first cracks appeared when Chairman Kong, Dae-young's father, arrived unannounced at the penthouse. He was an imposing man. Tall, broad, with silver streaks in his dark hair and eyes that held the weight of decades running an empire. He walked into their living room like he owned it, which, technically, he did, and dismissed the staff with a single look. Daughter-in-law. His Korean was crisp, his English even crisper. I trust you're settling in well. Imani rose from the couch, her spine straightening instinctively. Chairman Kong. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly. His gaze swept the room, landing on the novel she'd been reading, the half-empty cup of tea beside her. Judging. Always judging. Where is my son? In a meeting. He should be back within the hour. Then you'll do. He sat without being invited. We need to discuss your duties. Imani's jaw tightened. My duties? As the wife of the Kong heir. He folded his hands, regarding her with something between tolerance and disdain. There are expectations. Public appearances. Social obligations. You will need to learn Korean properly, your accent is atrocious. You will need to host dinners for our partners. You will need to produce an heir within the next 2 years. Imani felt ice spread through her veins. Produce an heir. Is there a problem? We've been married a month. She fought to keep her voice level. And you're already demanding grandchildren? I'm ensuring the continuation of this family's legacy. His tone brooked no argument. The alliance with your family was secured through this marriage. But an alliance without heirs is unstable. Surely you understand that. Before Imani could respond, could unleash the fury building in her chest, the front door opened. Dae-young stepped inside. His eyes swept the room, taking in his father's presence, Imani's rigid posture, the tension crackling in the air. In the span of a heartbeat, his expression shifted from neutral to something dangerous. He crossed to Imani, placing himself between her and his father. Father. His voice, rang through the room. Chairman Kang's eyes widened. For the first time, Imani saw genuine shock break through his controlled facade. You. The older man rose slowly, staring at his son like he was seeing a ghost. You're speaking. I am. Dae-young's voice was cold. Hard. Nothing like the gentle tones he used with Imani. And my first words to you are these: you will never come to my home uninvited again. You will never speak to my wife like she is breeding stock. And you will never make demands about our personal lives. Son. I have given you 30 years of obedience. 30 years of silence. Of doing what you asked, being who you needed, sacrificing everything for this family. Dae-young stepped forward, and for the first time, Imani saw the Mafia heir in him, the cold, dangerous man the world whispered about. But Imani is mine. And I will burn every alliance, every dollar, every ounce of power we have before I let anyone, including you, make her feel like less than the queen she is. The room fell deathly silent. Chairman Kong stared at his son for a long, tense moment. Then, impossibly, something shifted in his expression. Something that almost looked like respect. You've changed, he said quietly. I've woken up. Dae-young didn't waver. Now leave. We can discuss business tomorrow. Tonight, I'm taking my wife to dinner. The chairman held his son's gaze for another beat. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. Dae-young's shoulders sagged. The ice in his expression melted, replaced by exhaustion. I'm sorry. I'm sorry he came here, I'm sorry he. Imani grabbed his face and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was fire and desperation and gratitude and something dangerously close to love. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Dae-young's eyes were wide. Not that I'm complaining, he managed, but what was that for? For defending me. She ran her thumb across his cheekbone. For breaking your silence with your father. For choosing me over 30 years of conditioning. She shook her head, laughing despite the tears threatening to spill. You're insane, you know that. I'm beginning to realize. He pressed his forehead to hers. Worth it, though. 3 days later, Dae-young asked Imani to accompany him to something he'd been avoiding for 7 years, therapy. Dr. Yolanda Graham's office was warm and inviting, filled with plants and soft lighting and books that looked actually read rather than decorative. She was a black woman in her 50s with warm eyes and absolutely no patience for nonsense, which, Imani suspected, was exactly why Dae-young had chosen her. So, Dr. Graham said, leaning back in her chair. You've been mute by choice for 7 years. And in the past month, you've started speaking again. Exclusively to your wife. She raised an eyebrow. Any insights into why? Dae-young sat stiffly on the couch, Imani's hand clutched tightly in his. Because she makes me want to be heard. Expand on that. He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I spent 7 years believing my voice was a weapon. That anything I said could cause destruction. So I stayed silent. Safe. He glanced at Imani. But then I met her. And she looked at me like my silence didn't define me. Like I was worth knowing anyway. And I thought, if this woman can see something in me without words, what could we have if I gave her more? Imani squeezed his hand. Dr. Graham nodded slowly. And the guilt? About your mother? It's still there. His jaw tightened. I don't know if it will ever go away completely. It probably won't, Dr. Graham said honestly. Guilt like that becomes part of your architecture. But the goal isn't to demolish it. The goal is to build around it. To create a life so full of meaning that the guilt becomes one room in a mansion instead of the whole house. Imani watched understanding dawn on Dae-young's face. Watched something loosen in his shoulders. One room, he repeated. One room. Dr. Graham smiled. Now. Let's talk about how we get you speaking to more than just your wife. 2 months into the marriage. The threats started arriving on a Tuesday. Photos of Imani at her favorite coffee shop. Notes left on her car. Flowers delivered to the penthouse with cards that read, "The Kong family took everything from us. Now we take from them." Dae-young went cold in a way Imani had never seen. The gentle husband she'd come to know vanished, replaced by the Mafia heir the world whispered about. He tripled her security. Cancelled her public appearances. Started sleeping in a chair by the bedroom door. You need to rest, Imani said on the third night, watching him fight exhaustion. You can't protect me if you collapse. I can't lose you. His voice cracked. I've lost everyone I've loved. My mother. My brothers and sisters, emotionally. I can't lose you too. She crossed to him, kneeling beside the chair. You won't. You don't know that. I know you. She took his face in her hands. I know that you've built an empire while the world thought you were broken. I know that you speak in boardrooms through written words and command more respect than men who never shut up. I know that you love fiercely, protect brutally, and have never, never, let anyone hurt the people in your care. She kissed his forehead. I trust you, Dae-young. And I'm not going anywhere. He broke. For the first time since they'd met, Kang Dae-young wept. And Imani held him through every single tear. The confrontation. It took 2 weeks to track down the source of the threats. A rival family, the same one responsible for his mother's death, now led by a new, hungry generation, had decided to test the Kang Empire's strength. They thought targeting Dae-young's new wife would expose weakness. They were wrong. Imani insisted on being present for the meeting. Over Dae-young's objections. Over his security team's objections. Over everyone's objections. I'm not hiding while you negotiate my safety, she said firmly. I'm your wife. Your partner. Either we face this together, or we don't face it at all. Dae-young stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, smiled. You're terrifying. Thank you. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a private room in a high-end restaurant, secured by both families' teams. The rival family's new head, a young man named Park Junho, clearly expected to intimidate the mute Kang heir. He did not expect Dae-young to speak. You threatened my wife. Dae-young's voice was quiet. Controlled. Absolutely lethal. You surveilled her. Invaded her privacy. Made her afraid in her own city. Junho's eyes widened. You. I'm going to give you one chance. Dae-young stood, and even without raising his voice, the room seemed to shrink around him. You will cease all operations against my family. You will dissolve whatever remnants of your organization still harbor ill will toward the Kong name. And you will deliver a formal apology to my wife. And if I refuse? Dae-young smiled. It was the coldest thing Imani had ever seen. Then I will dismantle everything you love, piece by piece, without speaking another word. You'll never see me coming. You'll never hear me approach. And by the time you realize what's happening, there will be nothing left to save. The room fell silent. Junho looked at Imani, perhaps hoping to find weakness there. She met his gaze steadily. My husband is being generous. I'd take the deal. 1 week later, the formal apology arrived. The threat stopped. And Imani realized, with startling clarity, that she was no longer falling for her husband. She'd already fallen. 3 months into the marriage. I want to renew our vows. Imani looked up from her laptop, where she'd been reviewing marketing proposals. What? Dae-young stood in the doorway of her office, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Our wedding. It wasn't what either of us would have chosen. You didn't get to pick your dress or your venue or your guests. You didn't get to hear me say vows because I couldn't speak. So I want to do it again. Properly this time. Her heart stuttered. Dae-young. You can invite whoever you want. Plan whatever you want. He ran a hand through his hair, that careful composure finally cracking. I want to stand in front of everyone and say that I choose you. Not because my father demanded it. Not because of some debt from 17 years ago. Because you're the woman who made me want to speak again. The woman who held me when I cried. The woman who defended me to her family and stood beside me against my enemies and... He stopped, seeming to realize he was rambling. What I'm trying to say, he finished quietly, is that I love you. And I want the world to hear me say it. Imani stood. She walked toward him slowly, watching emotions flicker across his face. Uncertainty. Hope. Vulnerability. When she reached him, she rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his. Yes, she whispered against his mouth. His arms came around her instantly. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you again. She laughed, tears pricking her eyes. And yes, I love you too. In case that wasn't obvious. His smile, that rare, unguarded smile she'd come to treasure, broke across his face. It was a little obvious, he admitted. She swatted his chest. Shut up and kiss me again. He did. The ceremony was intimate. 50 guests maximum, held in the rooftop garden of their penthouse building as the sun set over Atlanta. Imani wore a custom dress that blended traditional Korean silk with African-inspired patterns. Dae-young wore a suit so perfectly tailored it should have been illegal. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the moment Dae-young took her hands, looked into her eyes, and spoke his vows aloud for everyone to hear. Imani. His voice, still unfamiliar to most of the guests, rang clear and strong. 3 months ago, you married a stranger. A silent man who gave you nothing but cold stares and empty rooms. You had every right to hate me. To resent this arrangement. To count down the days until you could escape. His hands tightened on hers. But instead, you stayed. You pushed. You refused to let my silence define us. You saw something in me that I'd spent 7 years trying to bury, and you refused to let it stay buried. His voice cracked slightly. You gave me a reason to speak again. And today, I'm using that voice to make a promise. Tears were streaming down Imani's face now. She didn't care. I promise to choose you. Every day, in every way. In silence and in speech. In darkness and in light. I promise to be your partner, your protector, your best friend, and your home. I promise to never let you face this world alone. He lifted their joined hands to his lips. I love you, Imani Brooks Kong. From this moment until my last breath. And probably beyond that too. Imani laughed through her tears. You're really going to make me follow that? I've heard you're good under pressure. She wiped her eyes, gathering herself. Kang Dae-young. When I walked down that first aisle, I was terrified. I thought I was giving up my future for a man made of ice and silence. I thought I would spend the rest of my life lonely and invisible, trapped in a transaction I never agreed to. She shook her head. I was so wrong. You're not ice, you're fire wrapped in frost, burning bright where no one can see. You're not silence, you're poetry waiting for the right audience. And you're not a prison, you're the first home I've ever felt truly safe in. His eyes were glistening now. The cold, untouchable Mafia CEO was fighting tears in front of 50 guests. I promise to be your voice when speaking hurts too much. Your strength when the world gets heavy. Your laughter when you forget how to smile. I promise to love you completely, the shadows and the light, the silence and the speech, the man you were and the man you're becoming. She squeezed his hands. You asked me once why you spoke to me. Why I was the one who broke 7 years of silence. I don't think either of us will ever fully understand it. But I think some souls recognize each other. Across distance, across difference, across everything the world puts between them. And our souls knew. She smiled. They knew we were coming home. 1 year later. The Kang family Christmas gathering was, predictably, chaotic. Imani stood in the kitchen of Chairman Kang's estate, directing staff with the confidence of a woman who had fought her way into acceptance. Her Korean had improved dramatically, her accent was still atrocious, according to her father-in-law, but he said it with fondness now. Her relationship with the Kang siblings had evolved from cautious to genuine. And her position as the woman who made the silent king speak had earned her a certain legendary status within the family. Mrs. Kang. One of the staff members appeared at her elbow. Your husband is looking for you. Imani smiled. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. She found Dae-young on the balcony overlooking the estate gardens, 2 glasses of wine already poured. Escaping already, she teased, accepting the glass he offered. Just needed some quiet. He pulled her close. And some time with my wife. They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow drift down over the gardens. I've been thinking, Dae-young said eventually. About the future. Okay. My father mentioned heirs again at dinner. Imani snorted. He mentions heirs every time we see him. I'm starting to think he has a script. True. Dae-young's arm tightened around her. But I was wondering, how would you feel about starting to try? Not because he demands it. But because. He hesitated. Because the idea of children with you makes me want to speak even more. To tell them stories. Sing them songs. Teach them everything my mother taught me. Imani's heart swelled. She turned in his arms, meeting his eyes. I think, she said softly, that any child of ours would be incredibly lucky. To have a father who fought for every word. Who knows the weight of language and the power of silence. Who loves so deeply that it breaks him and rebuilds him. Dae-young's expression cracked open with emotion. Is that a yes? That's a, let's start practicing. She grinned. Immediately. He laughed, a real, full laugh that still startled her sometimes with its beauty. Then he swept her into his arms and carried her inside. And in the years that followed, the Kang household was never silent again. Not with Dae-young reading bedtime stories in his deep, rich voice. Not with Imani singing lullabies her grandmother had taught her. Not with the laughter of children who never knew their father had once been trapped in 7 years of self-imposed silence. Because Imani had given him something more powerful than words. She'd given him a reason to use them. And there you have it, beautiful people. From a forced marriage to a forever love. I hope you felt every emotion in this story as much as I did writing it. If you loved this, make sure you're subscribed because I have so many more stories like this coming your way. Hit that like button if you're now obsessed with Dae-young, drop a comment telling me your favorite part, and share this with someone who needs a good cry today. Until next time, stay blessed, stay beautiful, and remember, sometimes the greatest loves begin with a single word.